Hello, my name is Agai Jones. I am the chairman of the board of the Greening Youth Foundation, and I am coming to you today to deliver a message to reinforce our friends, our partners, our interns, our employees' resolve in these moments, and to help connect others who aren't so sure about what we're called to do in terms of a leadership response to both the crisis of COVID-19 and more topically, the uh, many manifestations of the global system of white supremacy that we see unfolding with the brutal death of George Floyd. And so I want first to just talk to you about my personal context and say that I'm raw. I'm raw from mourning. Um, there's an anger and outrage that I feel. Also resolve to harness that into leadership actions and to align those leadership actions with what you've seen already from Greening Youth Foundation and from many of our partners who are acting accordingly. And so I don't want to make this long, so I'll just say that one of the contexts that informs my comments are that from Dr. King, that we are existing in an inescapable network of mutuality, one in which the actions of any of those that are part of the network impact the rest. And as in people who are concerned with environmental causes and ecology, we're very familiar with biodiversity and how that biodiversity helps us to have resilient environments. And unfortunately, we don't see enough of that same uh, desire and respect for biodiversity and for diversity in our social context. And so what do we do about it? How do we harness our rawness, our anger, our outrage in these moments? How do we bring that into something constructive and positive that continues to benefit marginalized people, marginalized communities, uplift the environment? Uh, we can look to the soil. We can get out back into nature, put our hands in the soil. One of the things we can do is stop so much streaming and go visit a stream. We can move away from our sofas and get back out into nature. But getting out into nature alone is not enough. What we also have to do is figure out ways to join forces with organizations that are aligned in terms of their values and our values. Uh, we have people who are doing that. We have people who are also extending their networks that are working beyond this current circumstance, pulling in people who are connected with them in order to extend their privilege to communities that are disenfranchised. Some of those people I need to call out. I'd like to recognize rather uh, Publix. I want to thank Simply Straws. I want to thank the folks at Backpacker Radio. I want to thank some individuals, Regina Hall and Patty Gonia. All of the organizations and individuals that I've mentioned are doing those things that I mentioned. They're extending their networks. They are joining with our cause, our mission to have more underrepresented people participate in careers in the environment, participate in discussions at the board level, to the front lines around how do we become more inclusive in approaching environmental concerns? How do we become more inclusive in environmental careers and create access for people who are underserved? One of the last things I'll mention is people who have leadership responsibilities and roles need to share their privilege. They need to invite other people to the table. And in modeling that behavior, I want to bring in our founder, Greening Youth's founder and CEO, Angelou Ezelo. Angelou, please join us, and I'd like to hear from you a little bit about in your book. You talk a little bit about the big difference that is made in culture and decision making in a workplace when there's a diverse group of people around the table. I'd like you to unpack that in the context of recent events. Talk a little bit more about why it's so important to have diverse folks around the table.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Agai. You don't even understand how important it is for us to have someone like you as board chair during times like this. Because as you said, being a mother of, two Black boys, having a husband, a father, uncles, the best way to describe it is a feeling of rawness, as you said. But there are feelings of anger, every day I wake up and I turn on the news, I I have to admit that there's a rush of emotions that I feel. But thank you for also, acknowledging the people who have stepped up, who have been courageous, and who have opened up their communities to support organizations like Green Youth Foundation and a few others that are on the front lines doing this work. And also thank you for mentioning my book, Engage, Connect, Protect, empowering diverse leaders, diverse youth as environmental leaders.
Mm.
It's true. One of the things that I do talk about in that book, and that I'm really urging a lot of my white colleagues in the environmental field to understand, is how beneficial it is to have different cultures and diversity at that table, because there's so many blind spots that you have when you're working on, in communities, certainly disenfranchised communities, communities of color, Black and brown communities typically. And if you're a board, if you're a staff in which you don't have representation from those communities, you're not only are you going to miss things, but you're running the chances of yourself in the organization no longer being relevant. You're not able to respond to the priorities of that community. Although you may be thinking you're kind of coming in to address the pain points or the needs of this community, you don't really know, so that's why it's important to have representation in diversity as part of the decision making within your organization.
Yeah, that really, your response really resonates with me, and it comes from a really authentic place. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience has been like going into spaces where you are one of the only diverse voices,
Yeah.
and what that vulnerability experience is like, what that leadership experience is like, and then how do you find a place of authenticity to project your voice when you know that the feedback loop has told you that you are not of value? How do
Oh,
you how do you do that?
that's a tough question, Agai. Yeah, so most of my life, like we're talking about wearing this mask, you know, going to, an predominantly all white Catholic boarding school in New Jersey. Although I went to Spelman, I then went to a majority white law school, University of Florida College of Law, and then making the decision to work in the environmental field. I constantly were in these environments within these major environmental organizations, or even working for the state of New Jersey Department of Agriculture. I found myself just being the only one, and really trying back then, just in the 90s, trying to understand why, because I knew that Black people, Mexican, Latinos, Native Americans, Africans, we all have like this symbiotic relationship with the environment, with nature. So um, it was always very curious to me, and perhaps that's in part why, and that was the impetus for the founding of Green Youth Foundation. But to your point of authenticity, I did also learn during that time that, you know, my packaging, my pedigree, all of that really mattered in terms of being able to get in that room and make people, white people, feel comfortable. If I can be completely transparent, like I knew I've gotten so good at it, like knowing the right things to say so that folks can be comfortable, and knowing the things that I'm going to say that may make people a little uncomfortable and ruffle feathers, but also being very conscious of the fact that the access that I've been afforded gets results for the people that I serve, the people that Green Youth Foundation serve. So always having to like balance how much I say and swallow, when the wrong things are said. Do I speak up now? Do I let them know that that's not the way you refer to people of color? That's not the way you
Right.
engage people of color if you want to really have authentic relationships. So it was constantly a dance, of how to do it, when to do too much, what would the response be? And I have to say that the recent explosion, of police brutality and Black Lives Matter, and the senseless killings of like George Floyd and so forth, have made me feel that I don't want to. I'm ripping off that Band-Aid.
Right.
I can no longer go into these spaces and not be the true Angelou, my authentic self. I think that I realize now, although we've been doing this work, and certainly the recent Black Lives Matter protests and all that haven't like changed. We haven't had to pivot our mission or pivot anything. We've been doing this for a while. But what I will say is, as a CEO and often being asked to speak in the public and on platforms and forums where people want to hear what I have to say, I'm no longer wearing that mask. I'm no longer going to question my words when I know that authentically they're there to protect, to serve, and to raise up and hold up communities of color, especially as it relates to this environmental field. So I look forward to continuing these conversations, and but don't ask me to speak unless you're willing to hear
You want to hear the truth. Yeah, it's you are a truth teller. I've always known you as a truth teller. I hear you saying that you've had to package the truth in a way that was palatable, but you've done it with grace and with perhaps considerable effort, but not effort that people could
Yeah.
discern. They just knew they were getting the truth. And you founded an organization along with James to be able to figure out a way to make sure that people of color were included in conversations, the same kind of conversations that you've had access to. And so you've really modeled that behavior over time. And I look forward to the next iteration of seeing perhaps the unvarnished, uh, unpackaged truth on display. And hopefully we're at a watershed moment where that packaging isn't as necessary, where people are saying, I see you, I recognize your humanity. I know that there's been a challenge historically with doing so, and I'm willing to listen, however uncomfortable it makes me, however painful your truth is, because I know that you're coming from a place of authenticity.
Right. Right.
So what further advice can you give to our allies, our friends, our employees, our interns, other supporters that find themselves in this specific moment in time? What other support, what other leadership behaviors can you encourage?
Yes. I think we silence, we can no longer be silent, you know, to my allies, to allies in this on this journey, you know, silence is in times viewed as being complicit, you know. So we need people to really be allies and agents for positive change, you know. This is not the time to, when the wrong um, comments or things are said and you feel uncomfortable about it, but you're like, I'm not really going to speak up because maybe I'll be viewed as fill in the blank. We need everybody to really step up and to be bold and really take a leadership, a front role in effectuating change, you know, because the thing that I would hate the most is if a year from now, 5 years from now, we're still having these conversations, you know? And that would mean all of these deaths have been in vain. You know, like one thing that I can say with George Floyd's death, I heard his little girl say, my daddy changed the world. This is after he died. My daddy is changing the world. So I want to see those organizations out there, particularly in the environmental field, the big greens, you know, to concede power to, it's not enough to kind of put a statement up on your
That's right.
website or on your social media posts that I stand in solidarity. You know, what are you doing?
That's
Like, show me your actions.
At the board level, what are you doing at the
Exactly.
leadership level? What are you
Yes.
doing in terms of your hiring practices?
Yes.
What are you
Yes.
doing in terms of an inclusive environment where people who work for you already can express their discontent with everyday business practices without fear of reprisals?
Exactly. Exactly. I have a quote that can I share a quote with you?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's by Wade Davis. It says, the world in which you were born is just one model of reality. Other cultures are not failed attempts at being you. They are unique manifestations of the human spirit.
That's
So,
beautiful.
yeah. I mean, I just think that we can do better. You
I
know?
think you're right. We can do better. And one of the things that you triggered for me around thinking about other cultures is that we have to stop viewing our struggle in isolation. There are people all over the planet, and we know this is people concerned about the environment. We know that people in Europe and Asia and Africa and Latin America and South America,
Yeah.
everywhere people are subject to the same kinds of forces. And so we need to get out of our shells, join organizations, and connect our struggles with theirs so that we have an impact that is exponential and multiplicative. And so
Absolutely.
your words reminded me of that. And I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much, Agai. And thank you so much for being on this journey with us. Your leadership means the world to us.
Thank you. Thank you for the same, Angela.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.